Situation comedies, or sitcoms, are among the oldest forms of television. A sitcom is a type of comedy that takes place in a specific location, commonly homes and workplaces, and features a recurring cast of characters. The earliest sitcoms were filmed in front of a live studio audience, while most modern sitcoms utilize a single camera filming technique.
Before the 80s, but how would you properly define a sitcom? What is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's changed a bit over the years. What it means is situation comedy. So a fictional comedic show or with around a plot. What I think around a sitcom is a little more like technical based. So you would think of something like Friends or Seinfeld or these shows, Cheers. It's the reason they were so successful is because they were highly lucrative because they're pretty cheap to produce because you've got two sets, you set up three cameras. Really, your only expense are the actors, which these people made a ton of money, and actors love doing them because it's an awesome schedule. Yeah. It's like even doing 22 episodes of a sitcom, you're working like 3 days a week. You shoot on Friday. It's like doing a 22-minute play at school, and you're out and you're hanging out 5 days a week. Whereas you think of something like The Office, which is still technically a sitcom, but it's single camera. It's shot more like a movie or a documentary. That's a 6-day work week.
Number 20, Full House, 1987 to 1995. Airing for 8 years and countless reruns, this show is absolutely sensational. The theme song alone will bring up memories of your childhood. Full House is a true gem, especially when discussing noteworthy sitcoms of the 80s and 90s. Number 19, Parks and Recreation, 2009 to 2015. This series features an ensemble cast with favorites such as Nick Offerman and Amy Poehler. It was developed and created in the style of The Office, but it took on a life of its own. Number 18, How I Met Your Mother, 2005 to 2014. This series focuses on flashbacks, narrated by Ted speaking to his children about how he met their mother. The show is unlike any other sitcom of its time, with a strong cast. Number 17, Family Ties, 1982 to 1989. Family Ties was all the rave during the 80s. The show focused on a teen with hippie parents. Producers were able to discuss a divided country in a palpable manner. Number 16, Three's Company, 1977 to 1984. This show focused on 3 single roommates living together, 2 female and 1 male. The show was groundbreaking, especially for the late 70s and early 80s. The trio found themselves in a variety of funny situations.
A sitcom is usually, the Emmys, I believe, just changed their own terminology on like what constitutes a sitcom versus a procedural, an hour-long show or whatever, because of all the streamers that have just sort of, pushed the boundaries and changed some of this stuff. But in general, a sitcom is a 30-minute show, which is actually a 22-minute show. And traditionally, it's going to involve a laugh track. It's going to be multi-camera. It's going to be filmed in front of a live studio audience. If it doesn't have a laugh track, sometimes both. Sometimes they pipe in the laugh tracks like the Indianapolis Colts or whatever did with crowd noise. But
this is a clip from the hit TV series Parks and Recreation. 128-ounce option. Most people call it a gallon, but they call it the regular. Now, let's see what that same clip would be like if we added a laugh track. 128-ounce option. Most people call it a gallon, but they call it the regular. It seems so wrong, but for most of television history, it was so right. Over the last half century or so, almost every comedy on television had canned laughter. From I Love Lucy to The Big Bang Theory. For some, the laughter is viewed as an imposition. For others, a secondary character you almost forgot was there, until it wasn't anymore. In recent years, the laugh track has been used less and less as sitcoms in general have decreased in popularity. Multicam sitcoms were popularized in shows like Friends, Frasier, Seinfeld, and more incorporated canned laughter.
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
The actors and actresses would know to hold for laughter, knowing that each scene would be sweetened.
This is the world's worst hangover!
The Discovery Channel documentary, The One That Goes Behind the Scenes, shows how it works.
Sometimes the audience responds too big. If I went with the actual laugh, so that laugh is still going through her next line into his next reaction. And that's it's 5-6 seconds, and in TV land, that's an eternity. Sometimes we have to put in a laughter that is shorter.
It felt like comedies would be like this forever. And then The Big Bang Theory went off the air in 2019 and took with it one of the last multi-canned sitcoms with canned laughter. When we look at the television landscape today, almost every single comedy is a single-camera comedy, and not a multi-canned sitcom with canned laughter. You can count on two hands how many multi-canned sitcoms that use a laugh track are on TV right now. And not to mention those that went off the air this year. The use of the laugh track has almost disappeared completely from the TV lineup. So, what changed? Dead air in television used to be frowned upon, and shows would push for laugh tracks whenever possible. Bill Cosby claimed his first sitcom, The Bill Cosby Show, that ran from 1961 to 1971, failed because he had insisted on not using a laugh track. Not to be confused with the very successful The Cosby Show that aired in the 1980s and did have a laugh track. And MASH fought to not have a laugh track at all, but they came to a compromise with the studio. They would use the canned laughter, but just not during the very serious OR scenes. While we associate the 80s and the 90s with the laugh track, that was actually the time when single-camera comedies without canned laughter started to take over. A key player in this transition was HBO. Their shows Dream On in 1990 and The Larry Sanders Show in 1992 ran without laugh tracks and even garnered praise for doing so. The airing of these shows proved that comedies could exist, and exist successfully without laugh tracks. Other studios took notice and began to follow suit. Then came Curb Your Enthusiasm, Malcolm in the Middle, Scrubs, Arrested Development, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, 30 Rock, The Office, and the list goes on and on. Writers and producers were excited by the change, as it allowed them to stray from the constant stream of punchlines to explore character-based humor. Another reason the laugh track fell to the wayside? According to Mike Royce, the co-showrunner of Netflix's One Day at a Time, I think one of the reasons why people don't like laugh tracks is they don't like to be told how to react. It's an American thing. Don't tell me what the to laugh at. The Big Bang Theory was one of the last big sitcoms that used canned laughter. And even their creator, Chuck Lorre, insisted that absolutely no sweetening took place on any of his series, which also include 2.5 Men and Mike and Molly, stating, "I do not and have never sweetened my shows with fake laughs. I've always thought it was pretty hateful and a self-defeating practice."
But you're usually going to get something that is self-contained, so it's episodic. You're gonna, if you tune in for a random episode of this show, it's going to take you 1 minute to kind of figure out who the characters are. You don't need to have seen every single episode leading up to that point if you don't want to. It's simple. It's usually comedic in its general approach, and it's just kind of comfort food.
Number 15, Will and Grace, 1998 to 2006. This series was a favorite, with viewers developing bonds to each character. Will and Grace won 18 Emmy Awards. Number 14, Friends, 1994 to 2004. After a decade of episodes, fans consider this series a classic. Based around a group of successful and attractive friends in New York City, this show has something for everyone to relate to. Number 13, The Jeffersons, 1975 to 1985. This series showcases a primarily black cast and even features interracial dating, a taboo topic in the 70s and 80s. Number 12, The Simpsons, 1989 to current. With 30 seasons of content, The Simpsons has remained on air decade after decade. The characters make up a great deal of pop culture references and entertainment. Number 11, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, 1990 to 1996. This series features young Will Smith and his journey from Philadelphia to ultra-rich Bel-Air when he moves in with his Aunt Vivian. The Fresh Prince is a staple in pop culture.
I mean, what 80s sitcoms do you think stood out that were both great and influential on what sitcoms were supposed to be?
80s did a really good job of sort of transitioning sitcoms from it. 70s sitcoms had sort of faded a little bit. You have I Love Lucy in the 50s, and there's tons of the kind of classic sitcoms that you think about when you think of sitcoms, had sort of begun to fade out by the 80s. So at the beginning of the 80s, you still have like MASH is still going strong. Happy Days has kind of come over its peak and was like
Love
downhill.
Happy
Yeah,
Days.
Happy Days is great. By the 80s, you know, its last like 3 or 4 years, it's declining. You have some other shows that are kind of standing in the breach, but it's not a super strong field for sitcoms. And in the meantime, your hour-long shows have kind of have started to dominate TV more and more and more. And then mid 80s is really where it starts to take off, and it really starts with the Cosby Show. Cosby Show, I believe, started in 84, and I want to say first year it was like number 3 in the ratings, or 4, something like that. Great debut in the ratings. And by the next year, it was number 1 in the ratings, and it pretty much just stays number 1 in the ratings for the next like 6 or 8 years. And in the process of that, it brings along other shows with it. So then you have this kind of golden age for sitcoms that's like the Cosby Show. Cheers started before Cosby, but it took a couple of years before it became like a full-on hit. So you have Cosby Show, you have Cheers, you have Who's the Boss, Family Ties, Golden Girls, you know, Growing Pains, Alf. I loved Alf when I was a kid. That's super weird. Yeah, I want Alf to make a comeback. I think that would be a great bit. And then you get even more like, I mean, all of those to some degree are pretty family friendly, but then you even take that a step further with like Full House and Growing Pains. And then like for us, like Saturday morning, you get Saved by the Bell and all that kind of stuff.
To shoot, you know, you had to shoot on film or you had to shoot on videotape. There was not like digital cameras. And so, you know, the advent of like a digital camera that you can throw on a shoulder and shoot in a room in a real set and make a sitcom like The Office, you couldn't do that in 1987. You had to have the big honking thing that was on wheels. So you had, then all of your decisions are like, it's got to be on a set that looks like a play that's very 2D. Except, you know, sometimes the answer to these questions are like really production oriented.
Yeah.
But also I think the people's, you know, comedy got like better and more nuanced, and you look at some of these shows that are so, you know, they're not waiting on the audience to catch up. That's great if you're into that show. If you're into something like Schitt's Creek, that's like a really niche show that people do love. But that show is like kind of high concept, and you kind of have to follow it from the beginning. It's hard to come in halfway. And with the old broadcast shows, when there weren't streamers or on demand or YouTube, you know, highlight reels or things like that, you kind of had to kind of dumb it down for the audience. So those shows, and a lot of them were really smart in the way they dumbed it down to be broad. It's not necessarily a bad thing.
Number 10, Frasier, 1993 to 2004. This series features the main character, Frasier Crane, and his brother Niles. The show is funny and full of comedy. Number 9, The Andy Griffith Show, 1960 to 1968. This show is filmed in the 60s. However, it has a timeless appeal that leaves viewers in awe. The show stars Andy Griffith and Barney Fife. Number 8, 30 Rock, 2006 to 2013. This show merges unique comedy and classic sitcom drama together. The series stars fan favorite Tina Fey. Fey is best known for her one-liners on the show. Number 7, Modern Family, 2009 to present. This series features stereotypical characters such as Phil Dunphy, played by Ty Burrell. His character is the typical clueless dad. The series features diversity, which is important, as most modern families today are diverse in culture, gender, ethnicity and race, and religion. Number 6, MASH, 1972 to 1983. This show follows Army staff during the Korean War at a hospital with the abbreviation MASH, Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. The show blended comedy with serious and important topics of the era. It was the perfect balance between both. For this reason, viewers were immediately drawn to MASH for its realistic yet fictional stories.
Multiple episode arcs were popular in the 90s. Shows such as Seinfeld, Friends, Will and Grace, Everybody Loves Raymond, Family Matters, and Sabrina the Teenage Witch used storytelling elements such as cliffhangers to keep audiences interested. These shows were more frank and explicit than in previous decades, and audiences became more comfortable with viewing controversial issues on their TV screen.
The envelope seemed to be pushed a little bit more when it came to shows in the 90s. Why did they do that? And do you think that was a successful strategy?
I think it was a bit of a pushback to the culture of the shows of the sitcoms of the 80s reflected the sort of overall culture of the TV watching audience of the 80s. You know, when we think of the 80s, we think of the you can go one of two ways. You think of the excess and the greed is good, and the Wall Streetification and consumerism and cocaine and everything that goes with that side of the 80s. But you also have Reagan and the moral majority, and that's like sort of dominating wide stretches of like broader America. And so the shows reflect that. Then you get to the 90s, and show creators are like rejecting that because of Reaganomics and the kind of the pushback to all that. And so yeah, you get a little bit, you get more edgy television, and you have there's a big kind of proliferation of stand-up comics in the 80s coming into the 90s being a big part of the mainstream of culture. And so that plays out a huge chunk in the 90s as well, because you have shows like Roseanne, you have Home Improvement. I mean, Tim Allen was a stand-up comic before he became Tim the Toolman Taylor and Buzz Lightyear and all that other stuff. Obviously Jerry Seinfeld. And then in the mid to late 90s, you get even more. It's like almost every year there's a sitcom with Ellen. There's a sitcom there's Grace Under Fire. There's all these sorts of things. So yeah. Anyway,
Raymond.
Absolutely. And
I mean, Seinfeld's really revolutionary that way. They had the motto like no lessons, no hugs, right? There's everything is just about being funny, and we're not here to teach you that it's bad to bully or anything like that. In fact, the funny thing about Seinfeld when you watch it now is like these are four horrible people.
Right.
Like, they're just vile human beings with no morality, but they're funny, so you like them, right? That's a pretty revolutionary thing. Yes, you're right. I think just in general, you look at things across music, like with grunge rock, or you look with things in the 90s television. Letterman was a huge part of this, where irony starts to come in more. And it's like we were kind of tired as a culture of a Family Ties where we learn a lesson.
Number 5, The Office, 2005 to 2013. This series became an international sensation, especially in the US. Beginning in the UK, The Office took on a life of its own shortly after the first few seasons. Steve Carell stars as Michael Scott. Number 4, Happy Days, 1974 to 1984. This show follows the teenage experience, set in the 1950s. The main character is known as the Fonz. The series showcases an idealized and wistful take on life. Fonz could water ski while wearing fashion-forward attire such as a leather jacket, making him a unique character all in one. Number 3, I Love Lucy, 1951 to 1957. Lucille Ball starred in this iconic, quintessential comedy alongside husband Desi Arnaz, Ricky Ricardo. It was one of the first television shows to be shot in front of a live studio audience. The show ranked number 1 for 4 seasons without pause. Number 2, Seinfeld, 1989 to 1998. Starring popular comedian Jerry Seinfeld, this series has been acclaimed as a show about nothing. Yet, it's one of the most successful. In fact, many Seinfeld stars began their acting careers on the show. Number 1, Cheers, 1982 to 1993. This show has received 117 Emmy nominations and a total of 28 wins. Cheers features some of the most talented writers and gifted actors and actresses, landing it in the number 1 spot.
These days, most sitcoms feature a single camera setup and are not filmed in front of a live studio audience. Examples include 30 Rock, Weeds, Scrubs, and Malcolm in the Middle. Growing increasingly popular is the mockumentary sitcom, such as The Office, Parks and Recreation, and Modern Family.
I declare bankruptcy!
Classic sitcoms still exist, including The Big Bang Theory and How I Met Your Mother, but they are gradually growing extinct.
What were some of the biggest shows, other than maybe The Office and Parks and Rec, to you in the 2000s?
You know, it became cool later on. It certainly wasn't cool when I was watching it. I was hip to Arrested Development early. That one kind of broke my brain with how, like, it was the first show I ever saw. It's like, yes, there is a joke in the foreground. 2 characters are talking and making a joke, but there are 6 things happening back here that are also funny. And if you watch it 6 times, and also things started to get more into, there was suddenly with this market for DVDs on these box sets. And so people were like building things to be rewatched and watched and have a narrative plot, because even network show like The Office early on, there's no streaming, but they were much more comfortable to have a linear plot go through multiple episodes like Jim and Pam, because they know, okay, even if you don't get this or you miss one or whatever, you can buy the DVD this summer and watch the whole thing like a movie. That was kind of the kind of in between zone between broadcast TV and now streaming.
Then you get to 2000s, which is kind of a little bit more highbrow comedy to some degree, with The Office, with Parks and Rec, and those kinds of things. How and why did sitcoms change in the 2000s?
So what happens here is you still have the leaders up top. So Seinfeld ended in like 97, I think, maybe 98. You still have Friends, you still have Everybody Loves Raymond, you still have Frasier, you still have Will and Grace, and you've got a few other shows that are going to make a mark. Like there's this show that NBC did called Scrubs. It doesn't have a laugh track. It's kind of weird and different, and the main character is quirky, not hot and successful. You know, like what do we do with that? Well, we could try some more stuff like that, and then you get like Arrested Development, you get The Office, you get Parks and Recreation, 30 Rock, Community, Modern Family, all these shows that are doing great TV. Like this is, when I think of sitcoms, these are the only shows I care about. There's no show that comes besides Friends and Seinfeld. There's no show that comes before like Arrested Development in 2003 that I care about at all. Like these are the shows that I think about when I think about sitcoms, but they don't do anything ratings wise. And so it's that chicken or the egg thing of like, we got to try something different because what we're doing is not working. But then when we make this thing that's different, it loses some of the broad audience because it's not as familiar. It's not as the beats aren't the exact same that sitcoms have been forever and ever and ever. And some people are going to reject that.